Good morning, everyone, and welcome to today's episode of Motivating Monday. Today, I'll be sharing with you about the compassion of Jesus. Before we go further, let's define the word compassion. According to WordWeb, compassion is a deep awareness of and sympathy for another's suffering. From Miriam, compassion is a sympathetic consciousness of others' distress together with a desire to alleviate it. And here's another definition from Oxford Dictionary: a strong feeling of sympathy for people or animals who are suffering and desire to help them. All these definitions from different dictionaries have something in common, and that is the word sympathy. Sympathy is a sharing the feelings of others, especially feelings of sorrow or anguish. The Hebrews writer described Jesus as the great high priest, and indeed, he is our great high priest, and he is our best example of showing and exhibiting compassion. And he says in Hebrews chapter 4, verses 14 to 16, the ESB renders as this: since then, we have a great high priest who has passed through the heavens, Jesus, the Son of God. Let us hold fast our confessions, for we do not have a high priest who is unable to sympathize with our weaknesses, but one who in every aspect has been tempted as we are, yet without sin. Let us then with confidence draw near to the throne of grace, that we may receive mercy and find grace to help in time of need. In the four gospel accounts, Jesus demonstrated compassion to different people on different occasions when he encountered them. He knew about their troubles, their problems, and the predicament that they have faced. He was not blind to their situations, and he exercised compassion by responding to their respected needs. Now, let us examine some occasions where Jesus showed compassion. First, compassion for the suffering and sick. Jesus demonstrated his compassion when he healed sick people. In the gospel account of Matthew 14, verse 14. But let's go back, or let's start verse 13. When Jesus heard of it, he departed thence by a ship into a desert place apart. And when the people had heard thereof, they followed him on the foot out of the cities. Verse 14. And Jesus went forth, saw a great multitude, and was moved with compassion toward them, and he healed their sick. Jesus had learned some badges and wanted to be alone. That's from verse 10 to verse 13. In verse 14, he had moved with compassion and he healed their sicknesses. Another occasion that Jesus showed compassion when he cleansed a leper. The gospel account of Mark chapter 1. Let's start from verse 40. And the scripture says, and there came a leper to him, beseeching him and kneeling down to him, and saying unto him, if thou wilt, thou canst make me clean. 41. And Jesus, moved with compassion, poured forth his hand and touched him and said unto him, I will, be thou clean. And as soon as he had spoken, immediately the leprosy departed from him, and he was cleansed. The man asked Jesus to heal him from leprosy, and indeed the Lord fulfilled his request. Jesus continued to show his compassion in another occasion when he gave sight to two blind men. Matthew 20. In verse 29 to 31, Jesus and his apostles departed Jericho, and a great multitude followed him. And it happened that there were two blind men sitting by the wayside. When they heard Jesus was passing by, and cried out and asked Jesus to have mercy upon them. But the great multitude rebuked them, these two blind men, to be quiet. However, they even cried out even more and asked the Lord to have mercy on them. Verse 32 of Matthew 20. And Jesus stood still and becalled them and said, what will ye that I shall do unto you? They said unto him, Lord, that our eyes may be opened. 34. So Jesus had compassion on them and touched their eyes, and immediately their eyes received sight, and they followed him. This man asked Jesus to have mercy on them, and the Lord granted their request. Jesus demonstrated his compassion when he brought a widow's son back to life. The gospel account of Luke chapter 7. After Jesus healed the centurion's servant in Capernaum, he went to a place or town called Nain. As Jesus drew near to the city gate, there was a widow carrying her one and only dead son. And a large crowd followed, and a large from the village was with her. Verse 13, Luke 7. And when the Lord saw her, the widow, he had compassion on her and said to her, do not weep. Then he came and touched the bier, the casket, the coffin, and the bearer stood still. And he said, young man, I say to you, arise. And the dead man sat up and began to speak, and Jesus gave him to his mother. Jesus raised the man from the dead, for he had compassion toward the widow. Jesus indeed showed compassion, and he is our best example of being compassionate. Another account where Jesus showed compassion when he fed the 4,000, Matthew chapter 15. Jesus returned to the Sea of Galilee and climbed a hill and sat down. A huge crowd followed him, and many people with different infirmities came to him and sought for healing, and the Lord healed them. And the people glorified God according to the scriptures. In verse 32 of Matthew chapter 15, then Jesus called his disciples unto him and said, I have compassion on the multitude, because they continued with me now 3 days and have nothing to eat. I will not send them away fasting, lest they faint in the way. In verse 29 through verse 33, these men asked Jesus to have mercy on them. Verse 33 to verse 38, Jesus fed them with 7 loaves and a few little fish. Not just those things that Jesus demonstrated, but he also demonstrated compassion when he gave the limited commission, Matthew chapter 9. In verse 36, Jesus had worked diligently to reach as many people as possible. However, when he observed the multitudes, he was moved by what he saw. Verse 36, when he saw the multitudes, he was moved with compassion on them, because they fainted and were scattered abroad as a sheep with having no shepherd. Verse 37 and verse 38, he made his disciples aware of the situation. In verse 10, rather in chapter 10, he sent the apostles out on what we call the limited commission. Truly, Jesus is our ultimate example in showing compassion when he is compassionate toward those who come to him. We as his disciples, we as his followers are to be compassionate as well toward those in need because we are expected to follow the example of Jesus. As the apostle Peter says in First Peter chapter 3, verse 8 and 9, finally, be ye all of one mind, having compassionate one of another, love as brethren, be pitiful, be courteous, not rendering evil for evil, or railing for railing, but contrariwise blessings, knowing that ye are thereunto called, that you should inherit a blessing. Brethren, friends, let us examine ourselves and ponder the life of Jesus as our greatest example of tender-heartedness or compassion. May we continue to strive to be like him each day and develop an attitude of being compassionate. Thank you for listening and have a wonderful week ahead.